If you're not willing to be trained or train yourself, you should not own a firearm. Hard stop.
You're listening to Talking About Guns, or TAG as we like to call it. My name is Matt Littman, and I'm Executive Director of 97%. We're a new bipartisan organization working to reduce gun deaths in America. As part of our mission to change the conversation around gun safety, TAG normalizes dialogue about guns. We invite guests from all sides of the gun debate, and we talk about this hot-button issue, but without the screaming. My guest today breaks down a lot of stereotypes about the gun community. He's an Asian American, openly gay, self-proclaimed tech geek who won the History Channel's Top Shot Season 4, which prompted him to leave his career at Google to become a professional sport shooter. He tours the country promoting the sport, serves as a media personality, is an adamant Second Amendment defender who has testified before Congress, and is a civil rights advocate within the firearms community. Chris Cheng, welcome to TAG.
Thanks so much for having me.
So, Chris, you have a different story than most people that we interview. We interview people who work on the gun issue in various capacities. You have a much different thing. You were working at Google, just tell me if this is wrong, dealing with like customers who would call you and yell at you. I think it is really, because I heard you talking about stress in one of your interviews. And then you entered the Top Shot competition. Well, first of all, I have to ask, how did you even think that you should enter the Top Shot competition?
It's a great question. And it was one of these really kind of insane thoughts that runs through someone's mind when you're watching one of your favorite game shows. You know, for me, right, used to watch Price is Right, Wheel of Fortune, and Jeopardy. And Top Shot was one of those favorite TV shows. And it's a marksmanship competition who are mostly professionals. They're law enforcement, military, Olympic shooters, and lifelong hunters. And I was none of those, right? I was your regular average Joe who's a self-taught amateur. But you know, when you're watching your favorite TV shows and a game show nonetheless, you sometimes, at least for me, I always fantasize about, going on Price is Right, going on Wheel of Fortune. And you're sitting there saying, oh, you know, I know the answer to this and that, even though, you know, you often don't have any business being on the show. But for me, Top Shot was such an engaging and fun show. And I wanted to have fun. I mean, for me, living life is about pursuing fun things and also pursuing things that are worth doing, right? Where you have to work hard, train hard, earn the reward. And Top Shot was the kind of experience that I knew I would need to train and work very hard to get up to snuff, right, with some of these world, champion shooters. And it was the experience of a lifetime.
So when you saw the show and thought I should go on this show, by the way, you're talking about Jeopardy and Wheel of Fortune. Jeopardy has an online quiz to see if you're ready for Jeopardy. I think of the 50 questions, I got 2 right. So no to that one and no to Top Shot. So when you were thinking about Top Shot, you already started training yourself. Like you watched it, you said, I want to do this. But had you already started training yourself?
I didn't start seriously training until I actually submitted my application for season 4 of History Channel's Top Shot competition. And so there was a 5-month period between when I applied and when I actually went to LA to compete in Top Shot. So there was that 5-month period where I treated training like a part-time job, spent 20 to 25 hours a week, 4 or 5 months, just studying the finer points of marksmanship. And then, of course, there's the mental game, too. I played sports when I was a kid, and that whole mental aspect of knowing I was an underdog, knowing that I was likely not as skilled or experienced as some of these marksmen. And so, the whole mental game was another part of my training regimen as well.
Were they taking you even seriously, like when you got there? Because, for example, you talk about in the finals, you were competing against the FBI agent who trains the special agents how to use a firearm.
Yeah, I think a lot of competitors did not take me seriously at all. And, I was on season 4 of Top Shot. In the previous seasons, you've got some of these self-taught amateurs, right, like me. And yeah, most of the self-taught amateurs are just sort of immediately dismissed and discarded as like, oh, it's a pipe dream for these folks to win. But the season 3 champion, he was also a self-taught amateur, and between the season 3, 4, and 5 winners, we were all self-taught amateurs, and it just really goes to show that when it comes to marksmanship, amateurs can hang with the very, very best. But again, it takes training, right? It's not like, yes, I have some level of natural skill, but I had to train and really focus and refine my marksmanship skills to take me from good to great, and that takes time and effort.
And then you play baseball?
Yeah, I played a lot of baseball when I was a kid, as well as golf, and I'm a musician also, and so those 3 components specifically gave me a training framework for marksmanship. And anybody who's played sports or is a musician knows that this is often about rote repetition, right? It's swinging the bat, swinging the club. It's doing all. I'm a double bassist, right? So it's all about all the finger patterns and finger strength and coordinating finger strength and bow movements. So for me, I just know how much effort and time it takes to get really good at a specific physical skill. And for sure, my sports and musicianship background helped give me a very strong edge in ultimately winning Top Shot.
Because you're prepared by the repetition, but at the same time, Chris, you're prepared because when you were at Google, you're used to being yelled at by people on the phone. So the stress level of that, you know how to get through that. And combined with the ability, the knowledge of repeating something over and over again, to use what's a cliche now, the Malcolm Gladwell 10,000 hours type thing. But
Exactly.
between those two things, that enables you to have the confidence that even if it's going not so great, you can get through it with what you've learned.
Yeah, exactly right. And so, my enterprise technical support experience of having really angry customers screaming at me on the phone while their email's down, and they're relying on me and Google, to get their email and their calendars back up and running, and to be able, it's a pretty specialized skill set to be able to focus on accomplishing a task when you have stressors coming at you from, it's not just the customer. Sometimes it's the internal engineering team or the product team, or you've got the PR team, right? We had some very large enterprise customers that I was supporting, and that kind of pressure is not something that a lot of people enjoy, and nor can they thrive in that kind of environment. But for me, I enjoy a challenge, right? For me, I perform at my very best when the pressure's on, when there's a lot at stake, right? And that, for me, that means I'm doing something meaningful, right? When there's a lot at stake and I care a lot and other people care about whatever the goal or the task is at hand. So I love those pressure cooker situations. And I think the last note on this point for me is it's an adrenaline rush.
Yeah.
Right? It is so thrilling to be, especially Top Shot is this mixture of team and head-to-head competitions. Both very thrilling, but for me, it's really the head-to-head competitions that are the best, right? It's literally do or die. If you can't make it through this challenge, you're going to get eliminated. And that is, I think, what makes any competition a great one, right? Where you see people overcome challenges, who rise to the occasion. And in the case of Top Shot, it happened to be a lot of fun, right? Where we're shooting incredible weapons and blowing up some really, really incredibly fun targets.
I watched one video where you're shooting and it makes the tune of the Star Spangled Banner. Pretty good.
That's one of my very fun skills, is playing music with guns and shooting these steel plates that emanate musical tones. And for me, right, that is a combination of my musicianship background, my marksmanship skill set, and just having a good time, right? And encouraging people to just, life, I think, is pretty hard for a lot of people these days. And it's just so easy to get discouraged and overwhelmed by whether it's, the gun debate, whether it's inflation and just the higher cost of living. your job, your family, etc. And just, for me, like a lot of my videos that I create are educational and entertainment focused. So I'm
They're
glad you stumble
also,
across them.
well, I'll tell you, Chris, they're also fast. You speak very well, and they pack in a bunch of information in like a 3-minute period of time. So did you know so you win this contest, you win $100,000. You're now a spokesperson, or how does it work with Bass Pro Shops?
So I was a sponsored shooter for Bass Pro Shops, and so for almost 4 years, they sent me all across the country to shoot in 3 gun competitions, and I went to a whole bunch of store openings for Bass Pro Shops, which was so much fun. If you've never been to a Bass Pro Shops, that's got to be on your list of things to do. They have so many activities for everyone of all ages. And I did autograph signings for my book Shoot to Win, and people, hundreds of people, right, like line up to for these store openings, and any kind of guns, ammo, and gear. I just asked Bass Pro Shops for all that fun stuff, and it would just show up on my doorstep. It was a really special period of my life, and I think the thing also that stands out to me about my Bass Pro Shops experience, and they sent me all across the country where I met some really amazing Americans. I'm here in California, in San Francisco of all places, not the most gun-friendly, part of the country, but, I grew up in California, hugged the coasts a lot, been to Chicago, but had not really been to the South or the Midwest. But Bass Pro Shops sent me into some just absolutely gorgeous parts of our country. The people are amazing.
Give me an
and so
example,
kind.
Chris. Where'd you go that you had never been to that you thought was amazing?
Yeah, so I went to Fort Benning, Georgia, and this was for a USA shooting training week. And long story short, I didn't have the right shotguns, and I knew that, for this particular type of shooting sport. And I just show up, and I'm just like, hey, I want to just have a fun time, just learning a new discipline, meeting some new people. And this father-son, they saw that, oh, I had the totally wrong shotguns, for this type of shooting sport. And they loaned me a shotgun for 5 days, right? They knew who I was, but, I'm still a stranger to them, right? And they had a backup shotgun that they weren't using. It was just for backup, and say, hey, Chris, use the shotgun. You'll shoot so much better. And they said, you just keep it with you for the whole week, and right, we'll just, you give it back to us at the end of the week. And it's that kind of fellowship, that kind of sportsmanship, and also everyone's looking out for each other. There were many instances where I would show up for a shooting match, and maybe I didn't have enough ammunition, for example, and there would be, I've given ammunition, right, to other shooters, and other shooters have, given me ammunition. So that's just another example of how there's just so many thoughtful and and gun owners who are just they're the kind of people, right, they'll give you the shirt off of your back, right?
Right. So I think you're making a larger point here, Chris, which is, I grew up in Long Island. I didn't see a gun till my college dorm when I was 19, and a guy down the hall showed me one. I never heard of somebody owning a gun growing up. But there are, in a way, it's like two Americas, right? You're in San Francisco, I'm in Los Angeles. These are not gun culture places. There are plenty of places that have a gun culture that a lot of people here in San Francisco don't understand, right? They just truly don't get it. And so there's this notion that if you're not on the same page on the gun issue, you're a terrible person, right? And that's not the case. In other words, what you're saying is there's this whole culture of wonderful people. 99.9% of them are probably good people, right? And there are terrible incidents, but for the most part, this is a misunderstood segment of society by people who do not own guns.
Yeah, precisely. And, for me, it's this misunderstanding that we as Americans need to tackle. And I have, for me, there's an exact parallel in my life around being gay and being part of the LGBT community, because gay people are often also misunderstood, right? And anybody in the LGBT community understands that, look, if we're often misunderstood, and it's up to us to tell our stories, right? To explain to everyone that, right, we're not the bad guys. Similarly with gun owners, it's like, look, like, I'm a gun owner, but right, I'm not the one going out there committing crimes, right? So all of these gun control initiatives that come down the pipeline and disproportionately negatively impact responsible gun owners, right? It's the traditional fear driving policy that is well intentioned and well meaning, but can have very disastrous consequences, right? In the context of gun control, it's, look, if you want to ban assault weapons, if you want to restrict magazine capacity restrictions, who's going to follow these laws? It's only going to be law-abiding citizens who are not the ones we need to worry about. So, this needs to be a thoughtful, open-minded conversation that non-gun owners, anti-gunners, and gun owners, right? There's three constituencies that we need to come together, right? We need to have conversations in good faith, right? And so I'll say for my part, look, yes, I'm pro-gun, I'm pro-Second Amendment, but I understand the other side, and I will always have a good faith conversation with an anti-gunner or with some undecided person, right? And I'm not going to belittle you because you think differently than me, and I'll disagree with you, but I will do it respectfully. And I feel like it's that essence that is it's just missing, right, in American culture these days. And we used to have a much more compassionate and curious culture, but now it's sort of, right, we've degraded ourselves to overly simplistic viewpoints, like the dogma of the political parties. Just like it's making us dumb, and that frustrates me, right?
Well,
like, nobody thinks anymore.
I think
it's like,
right. You're saying that and this is absolutely the case, that this isn't just true on the gun issue, it's true on many issues. In other words, people are totally locked in and they don't want to hear another point of view. They're not interested in another point of view. And that is a fairly new phenomenon. If you don't totally agree with the person, you're completely wrong. In other words, most people have the same political views that their parents had. It's genetic, like your eye color in a lot of ways. And to be furious with people because, let's say, they don't agree with you on what the tax rate should be, seems a little off. Not everybody agrees on all of immigration policy, but not everybody's a horrible person because they don't agree. People have good reasons. My point of view, I'm a Democrat, right? My point of view, things that we favored 20 years ago, 30 years ago are anathema now. So, you could be wrong on the issues, and people should have a little humility and understand that there are points of view out there other than their own, and take the time to listen.
Yeah, absolutely right. And there are these purity tests that are put out there, right? And if you don't pass the purity test, you're all of a sudden at risk of being canceled, of being called all sorts of nasty names. And that's just not healthy for any culture. It's not good for our country. It's very unhealthy for our communities, and also just right at the individual level. I want individuals to feel good about our interactions with our fellow citizens. And more often than not, especially on social media in particular, it's this poisonous swamp. And it's not discussion, right, online. I mean, all the online stuff, it's online screeds and threats and insults. And that doesn't do anybody any good. And for me, as much as I'm a technologist, right, I started my career at Google. I'm still, in Silicon Valley. I am wary and skeptical of technology, and very specifically social media. I try and minimize my time on social media and optimize my time for real life experiences, right? Going outdoors, whether it's hunting, whether it's having dinner and drinks with friends, but doing things in real life, right? Like social media is not real life on almost all axes. We're going to have a backlash. I mean, we already are having a backlash
Yeah,
against
I
social
think so
media,
too.
right? It's if you look at the different generations, and the younger generations are spending less time on social media, right, than some of the older generations.
You
So
know, you talked about this, Chris, too, which is you talked about the assault weapons just a minute ago, and an assault weapons ban, just so folks know, is favored by the majority of Americans, but only 34% of gun owners favor an assault weapons ban. And there's no assault weapons ban. This is 2022, is not happening in the next couple of years because there aren't the votes in Congress to do it. But also, of the 45,000 or so deaths with a gun on a yearly basis, very few of them are with assault weapons. While they're scary when they're in a mass shooting, we have about 26,000 suicides a year. And that goes very undercovered. So, and we've had this conversation, I've had this conversation with folks when I've been interviewed on CNN or BBC or whatever it might be, which is mass shootings get covered, but the 26,000 suicides a year do not. And that's the vast majority of gun deaths. What do you think we can do about that?
yeah, it's a great question. So, 10 years ago is when I won Top Shot and left Google. And coming from Google, we have a very data-driven approach, right, to understanding problems and therefore understanding what solutions, right, might exist. So the numbers that you're citing here, and I'll convert it into a fraction here. So 2/3 of gun deaths every single year in our country are suicides, right? 2/3. This is the majority of gun deaths, right? That are suicides. And so, 10 years ago, the firearms industry, we were not talking about this at all. And I was dumbfounded. I'm like, what? Why not, right? We're getting so consumed with the mass shooting, problem, and then right getting wrapped up around assault weapons and all this other gun control stuff. And so I did some research and understood that a lot of the gun industry and gun community did not talk about this for kind of two main reasons. The first one is taboo, right? It's just a very uncomfortable
Yeah.
topic, right, to talk about suicide and suicide prevention. But number two, we didn't know how to talk about it, right? How do you responsibly broach the topic of suicide prevention when it is its own specialty, right? There's a field of health, mental health professionals, medical professionals, nonprofit volunteers, right, who focus on suicide prevention. So for gun owners and the gun industry and community, right, we did not have the language, the framework, the information at hand around how to talk about suicide prevention. So starting about 8 years ago, I started doing some connecting, between the suicide prevention world and the gun industry. And we've made some incredible strides, right? It's a first of its kind partnership between the National Shooting Sports Foundation, which is the firearms industry trade group, and the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, where right, you have two topical area specialists, right? The subject matter experts, right? The AFSP, suicide prevention specialists, and the NSSF, right? The gun industry experts come together, and for the past 7 years have been partnering with the Veterans Affairs Administration and other groups to create educational material, right? Targeting veterans, targeting gun owners, and helping provide the language and information around how do we have, again, these brave conversations that are responsible, that are empathetic, and ultimately that are helpful in helping save lives. And it's this is going to be a multi-generational campaign, right? Like if you think about the anti-drunk driving campaigns, right? That was back in the 80s. I'm a Gen Xer, so I grew up hearing all about designated drivers, but that wasn't always the case, right? That having a DD, right, wasn't always a thing, but now it is a thing. But it takes multiple decades, and suicide prevention is going to be, in my mind, very much in the same sort of trajectory and experience as anti, drunk driving campaign back in the 80s and 90s. So we're going to get there, but it takes hard work, and it takes, again, people opening up their hearts and their minds to accepting new information. And last thing I want to say on this point is, I used to come from a place where I thought suicide was inevitable and that it wasn't fixable, right? So this is another way to say this is, hey, if somebody wants to kill themselves, they're going to find a way, right? So therefore, it's not worth trying to stop them because you're just going to commit, they're going to commit suicide anyway. But that's not true, right? So that is one huge fact that I have learned from the subject matter experts, that suicide is preventable.
In other words,
And
part of this, Chris, is if you try to commit suicide with a gun, more than 95% of the time, you're going to be successful. If you try any other way, the odds are that you're not going to be successful when you try to commit suicide.
It's that, and but I think if you back up a step, right? Obviously, we want to intervene before somebody even attempts, right? So that's I think the key point, right? We want to be an interrupter, right? Every single one of us has the power to be an interrupter and stop somebody's train of thought around suicide. And I thought that wasn't possible. I used to come from a place where, it's a futile thing, right, for any of us to try and stop someone from taking their life. But again, that's false. Like, that is the studies and also the case studies have shown that we each can be an interrupter. We can stop someone and prevent someone from taking their lives, whether it's with a firearm or any other means. This is not just about guns, right? This is this much larger mental health challenge, right? This public health crisis that we face in our country. And look, just to for me, to really simplify this is about reconnecting with our humanity, meaning that I need to respect you and you need to respect me, and we all need to respect each other as people, right? That I don't have enemies out there. It doesn't matter what your political stripes are or what your opinions are about guns. I don't, it's I think there's too many Americans these days who think that they have quote unquote enemies out there, right? And it's no, everybody, if you just go next door, knock on your neighbor's door, introduce yourself, and just have a regular conversation like a normal person, right? And it's look, we're all people, we're all flawed, we all have amazing potential though, right? And lots of great experiences ahead of us if we just chill out.
Yeah.
Right?
I think
treat each other like people.
Yeah. And to your point on guns and suicides, we had on Amy Swearer from the Heritage Foundation recently. And Amy was talking about how she was going through a tough time and she gave her guns to somebody else to hold while she was going through a tough time. And, when you talk about mental health and, depression is horrible, but sometimes temporary. And if you're able to possibly get through it and get to the other side of it, that's fantastic. But when you're going through it, to be able to know that you may not be responsible is part of this as well, is also very important. You do a lot, Chris, when I watch all your videos, which are available on YouTube and where else? Anywhere else?
YouTube and Instagram, Facebook, but mostly. Well, I don't know. Yeah, they're all over the place.
They're
just kind of great.
They're really good. Yeah. How do you talk about responsible gun ownership in your videos? You have rules, I've noticed as well. Can you talk about that for a second?
Yeah, absolutely. So at the very crux and core of firearm safety are the safety rules, and there's some variations of these rules, but basically it's, always keep the gun pointed in a safe direction. It's keep your finger off the trigger until you're ready to shoot. It's knowing, what's behind your target, and to, keep the gun unloaded unless you're actively using it. And so there are these safety rules where, look, if you follow the safety rules, right, that you and others will be safe. And the way that I talk about gun safety is really about the personal responsibility, right, component. So I learned how to shoot at a very young age when I was 6 years old. My father taught me how to shoot. I grew up in Orange County in Southern California when there were not a lot of gun owners at the time, at least definitely not in my friend or family, circles. And so my father teaching me the fundamentals of gun safety sent a very strong signal to me about personal responsibility, right? Here's my father who is trusting me, right, at the age of 6, right, to shoot a firearm, of course, under his supervision. But, I still remember, even at that young age, that, okay, this is a lot of responsibility. And if I screw this up, right, this could have dire, deadly consequences, right, for me or for other people around me. So this whole, yeah, I mean, this is sort of just a meta commentary on American society where I feel that this whole concept of personal responsibility is not taken as seriously as it used to be, right? And there's more of this opinion of I'm entitled for whatever, or I think the government should help me with insert thing, whatever that thing is. And look, sure, the government should be helping, right? Individuals and communities sometimes for certain things, but that shouldn't be, in my opinion, that should not be the primary philosophy for an individual. Right? The primary philosophy should be that I need to be self-sufficient. I need to be personally responsible for my safety, for training myself, whether it's, in school, whether it's in sports or music or whatever activity and skill set, right, that you are involved in, and that I don't have this outsourcing or victim mentality to say that somebody else or something else should take care of the thing for me. I think that's the wrong general attitude for Americans to have. And if you want to be successful, if you think just about like all the most successful people in the world, they're the ones who often, they took initiative, right? They weren't waiting for somebody else to do something for them. They went forward and they created something new and they made it happen. And I think that's what has made America great. That's what will continue to drive our economy to put food on the table. When Americans take initiative, right, and take your own destiny in your own hands.
Chris, are you an example of that? Are we saying you're an example of that?
I guess I'm always uncomfortable, I guess, like talking about myself.
But listen, look at what you've done.
Like
I mean, look at what you've done, right? So you were in Orange County, you got to Google. First of all, even that's amazing, no matter what phone calls you were getting, right? And then you created this whole business and life for yourself that you did on your own. So I think you are an example of that. If you don't want to say so, I will.
Well, thank you. Yeah, and it's I want to live by example, and a part of my Asian upbringing is one where I tend not to talk about my accomplishments because I feel that my accomplishments should speak for themselves, right? And talking about accomplishments, it's a fine line, right? You cross into like braggadocio and just ego and such. But it is something I am very proud of my accomplishments. So I guess let me definitely make that very clear, right? And a lot of my accomplishments are due to my hard work and sacrifice, and that I don't let things just happen to me. I don't expect other people. I don't expect people to help me, but I'm also not afraid to ask, right, for help, right? If I need help, hey, look, like nothing wrong with asking for help. But again, it's like taking initiative, right? And it's understanding your skill set, understanding your limitations.
That's right. Knowing what you don't know.
Knowing what you don't know. And if you don't know something, go find people.
And no one's going to help you if you don't ask.
Yeah, bingo,
right,
exactly.
Right. Let me ask you, you mentioned you're Asian American. There's been a lot of violence against Asian Americans in the last couple of years. The numbers are way up. I know that there's been a rise in gun ownership. Can you tell us a little bit about the rise in crime and the importance of the Second Amendment and how people maybe can defend themselves. Can we talk about that for a second?
Yeah, absolutely. The past 2 years, right, during the pandemic, we've seen at a high level unprecedented growth in first-time gun owners to the tune of 12 million gun owners in the past year and a half, which is, again, it's unprecedented. Now, another unprecedented figure here is there's been a 43% increase in Asian American first-time gun ownership. I've been a gun owner for 15 years, and I've shot guns for about twice as long as that. And for me, there's a very clear correlation between this 43% increase in Asian American gun ownership and the increase in crime against Asian Americans during the pandemic, where many of us were being blamed for COVID, being violently attacked on the streets of San Francisco, of New York, LA, and other parts of the country where you would think, right, that are safe, but they're not. Some of the most heinous crimes have happened here in San Francisco, where elderly Asian Americans have been gravely injured, who have been killed. We have seen a progressive district attorney who was not prosecuting these crimes. And that fueled a ton of anger amongst the Asian American community, right? Where if you can't trust the police and you can't trust the criminal justice system to capture and arrest and convict these criminals, then who can we trust? And again, this comes back to personal responsibility and how the Second Amendment gives us the right in America to take the personal responsibility of using a firearm, if we so choose, right, for personal protection and self-defense. And so you have these Asian Americans who, the first time in their lives, they were asking themselves a question, right? Should I own a gun? Right? Is a gun for me? And like during that question, it takes a lot of people a lot of time and distance to even just get to that question. And so that is a watershed moment, right, for Asian Americans to be asking themselves, should I buy a gun? And then taking that final step of, purchasing a gun, right? That's that 43% year over year increase in Asian American gun ownership. And then for me, as a safety ambassador in the gun community, for the personal responsibility and professional responsibility that I see is now I need to encourage those first-time gun owners to go get trained. It is insufficient and irresponsible for you to just go buy a gun and think that that's the end of.
Do you encourage safe storage as well, Chris, when they're at home?
Absolutely. Yep. So safe storage and safe handling, and these all come with firearms ownership. And I can't tell you the number of times I've heard a prospective gun owner who says, oh, well, I'll spend a few $100 and buy a gun and then I'll be safe. And they think that's it. And I say, no, that is incorrect. And I say, well, look, you need to take training. There's going to be costs for ammunition. And to be frank, there have been a few friends and colleagues who said, well, I'm not willing to go down that path. And I say, well, then you know what? Gun ownership is not for you. Right. You will not fall into the category of responsible gun owners. So therefore, I can't advise or support or suggest that you buy a firearm, right? Until you're ready to be properly trained and educated on handling and storing this firearm responsibly. So, and I hope there's more gun owners, right, who take that attitude of, look, like guns are not for everyone. You have some gun advocates who are like, guns are for everyone. Like, no, everybody, look, like guns are clearly not for everybody, right? And when they're not appropriate for certain individuals, we can't be afraid of saying, look, like if you're not willing to be trained or train yourself, you should not own a firearm. Hard stop.
Chris, thank you for doing this. If people want to find you, they find you on YouTube, Instagram, where else? Anywhere else?
Yep. All the social media stuff. My handle, thankfully, is very consistent at Top Shot Chris. And I've also got a website, topshotchris.com.
Fantastic. At the end of every episode, we ask our guests to tag somebody that they think would make for a good guest for this program. Who do you have in mind for us, Chris?
Yeah, so my good friend Philip Smith over at the National African American Gun Association, I think he'd be great for the show. He's doing some wonderful things for the African American community, and we've been actively talking about partnering the Asian American, Asian Pacific American Gun Owners Association, where I'm on the board, with partnering with NAGA, and again, you're showing Americans that there are gun owners are great people, and it cuts across race, it cuts across gender, sexual orientation, religion, geography. It's the gun community is a positive force in our country, and I want to be a part of showing the great side and the wonderful side of Americans. So Philip Smith from NAGA is the person.
Chris, you're a one-man stereotype breaker. Is what I would say. Thank you so much for doing the show. We'll speak to you soon. Thank you again, Chris.
Thanks for having me on.
Sure. Now, in place of our Siegel Scope segment, we're going to run the Q&A with Dr. Siegel that took place during our 97% What's Next conference. To view all of the sessions from the conference, please visit our website at 97%.us. Thank you.
Okay, so here we go. Question, are gun owners really a monolithic group, or are they subdivided among clear subgroups? Well, clearly they are not a monolithic group. They are clearly divided among subgroups. We did research in which we actually segmented gun owners into groups. We used a latent class analysis, which is a fancy statistical procedure, but we actually grouped gun owners into 3 or 4 different classes that differed in different ways. So there's no question that they're not a monolithic entity. There are clear subgroups, but with that said, our research does show that the overwhelming majority of gun owners do support these policies across all of these different segments, or most of these different segments. Can you elaborate further on the process required to obtain a permit? How long would it take, and what information is reviewed besides local and state databases for misdemeanor or felony history? Well, the idea of this would be to try to make it a very quick process. 48 to 72 hours would be the goal. The only thing that would really be checked would be the state and local databases checking for criminal history. That would be the emphasis. Because of federal law, you would also have to check for a drug history and involuntary mental, commitment. But those are not really the hallmarks of the major aspects of what would happen in the permit process. This is really about making sure that people do not have violent misdemeanors on their record. Third question, since the excuse by the NRA and Second Amendment enthusiasts for not supporting universal background checks is always to warn of a slippery slope, have you or can you do research that proves that slippery slope arguments are bogus? All I can do is try to convince people through the fact that we are. We are in this platform, we are renouncing assault weapons bans. I think that's a pretty good indication that we don't have something else up our sleeve. This is not a trick. We're not trying to get these 3 policies in so that we can then, say, oh, well, by the way, what we really want is an assault weapons ban. There needs to be a certain level of trust, and that needs to be earned. And so, my hope is that I've earned that trust through the care with which we've tried to look at the concern of gun owners. Hopefully that's clear. But if not, it's something, we need to earn. Fourth, how will Bruin decision impact gun safety legislation? Well, that's a great question. And one of the advantages of this platform is that it's perfectly suited as a post-Bruin policy. And then let me give 2 reasons for that. So the first problem with Bruin, not problem with Bruin, but the first implication of Bruin is that it gets rid of most may issue laws. Not completely, but it gets rid of the part of the laws where people need to show a purpose, a valid purpose for owning a gun. Well, in reality, what we found in our research is that the only real reason why we need may issue laws, the only reason why may issue laws are effective is because states don't have laws that prevent violent criminals, misdemeanor criminals, from possessing guns. In other words, if your criteria that you list for possessing a gun are comprehensive, then you don't need a may issue law. You don't need to give police discretion, right? The whole point of a may issue law is that it gives police discretion. Why is that discretion needed? The only reason the discretion is needed is because they're not allowed to deny permits to people who they know have a violent history if it doesn't come out at the felony level. So they may know, the local sheriff may know that this person has a history of violent crime, but it's not a felony. And since that's not a prohibitor in state law, they can use their discretion to say, you know what, I know this person, they have a record, they're not getting a gun. Well, you don't need that under our platform, because under our platform, any violent misdemeanor is disqualifying. So once they do the check and determine that you don't have a violent misdemeanor, it's a comprehensive check. And then there's no more discretion needed. You've done all the checks that you need to do. So it essentially allows us to even though Bruin knocks down these may issue laws, it essentially makes up for that because you no longer need the may issue law. The second reason why I think this set of policies is particularly appropriate given Bruin is that all of these are policies that are going to survive post-Bruin. It's very clear that permit requirements are acceptable. In fact, Bruin states clearly and definitively that it is constitutional. It does not violate the Second Amendment to require permits. I mean, they specifically state that in the decision. So we know that the permit requirements are going to hold up. We know the violent misdemeanor requirements are going to hold up. And I don't anticipate any major challenge to the red flag law since we're dealing with people who are at high risk of violence. And there is a history in the United States going way back of taking guns away from people who have high risk for violence, especially if they're Black. But that history is well established. So I don't see any, I think this set of policies is an appropriate one because it's not going to be overturned by Bruin. Okay, next question. When you did your work on reducing tobacco death, did you include the views and opinions of smokers in crafting your policy solutions? That is a terrific question. And so the answer is yes. In fact, the idea for trying to approach the problem in this way, for me, came from my experience in tobacco control. Because what happened with tobacco control is it started as a fight between smokers and non-smokers. It really did. And the game didn't change until smokers and non-smokers got together, started talking, found common ground, and then it really became a battle of the public versus the tobacco industry. And that's when we basically were able to take on the industry and win. And so I think the same thing is true here with gun violence prevention. I think it's only by bringing gun owners and non-gun owners together and uniting as a public that is supporting these laws that we're really going to see a lot of action take place. The next question is, how many states have permit laws and what can we do to help enable permit laws at the state and local level, particularly in red states? So right now, there are approximately 12 states that have comprehensive state permit laws. There are an additional 6, I believe, that have permit laws for handguns only, not for long guns. What can we do to enable these laws? I mean, I think the whole point of this platform is to basically say to policymakers, hey, look, Here is a policy package that was designed specifically with the input of gun owners to try to find ways, easy ways, simple ways to reduce gun violence by a large amount without interfering with gun rights. And in fact, by making it easier in many ways for gun owners to obtain guns. There are a lot of wins here, a lot of potential wins here for gun owners. I think that's going to make the major difference, because when you go to your state legislature and, as a gun violence prevention organization, say, hey, we want you to do this for public health, that's one thing. In a red state, maybe that's not going to go over that well. But if you go to them and you say, hey, we're a coalition of gun owners and non-gun owners, and we want you to look carefully at this package because it protects public health, evidence-based, but at the same time, look at all these things that it can do for gun owners. I think it's going to have a very different impact. And this is all consistent with what we heard from the congressional panel today. We heard consistently from Congressman Walsh, Congressman Moulton, that, we need to go in as a unified coalition of the public, not just non-gun owners, gun owners and non-gun owners, even having gun owners leading the charge. And we need to also emphasize that these are policies that are designed to meet this delicate balance of being effective in reducing firearm homicide, but at the same time, not interfering or interfering minimally with the ability to access guns, and providing what I think are unprecedented protections that have never been really thought about for gun owners. Especially this idea of the repeated paperwork that forms gun registries, that essentially, has the model and serial number of every gun that every gun owner owns. Okay.
Dr. Siegel, we have time for one more question. There are several more questions, and we can try to, if people are interested in having Dr. Siegel answer some of these questions via email, they can feel free to reach out to us and we'll do the best we can to answer any additional questions. But one final question is, how would requiring gun owner purchase of firearm liability insurance fit into this policy package and analysis?
So that is not part of the package. I mean, I think that's a separate issue. And I think that there are certainly some benefits of doing that. But I think I guess I would say that that's not, it's just beyond the scope of our package here. It's really, because it's getting away from the focus on kind of keeping guns away from people who shouldn't have them because they're at high risk. So, I would basically just kind of defer on that one.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Siegel. As you know, we really appreciate all of your work and your team's work and your insight and collaboration on this.
I'm Matthew Littman, your host of TAG. I hope you enjoyed the conversation. If you did, we'd love for you to subscribe, give us a 5-star rating, and tell your friends about us. You can find more episodes of TAG on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or wherever you like to listen to your podcasts. Give us a follow on Instagram and Twitter at 97%org, and tag who you'd like us to chat with next. Thank you for listening, and we'll talk to you soon.